Hello everyone, welcome to the Spotlight at Farsight for the 16th of August 2026, and this is the second of the Spotlights we've done in August, and this is going to be a really interesting one because there's so much going on right now, and there's so much that people don't want you to see. Okay, I don't know how the world events are going to turn out, but it's really looking like we have the possibilities of sort of major world events turning in a very negative direction. We just have to wait and see. But the bottom line for us is that we know that the world's got to come apart in order for disclosure to really happen. So that's what I'm going to be talking a little bit about today, except that right now I'm going to be starting that by telling you about the new projects that we have coming out. This will be out in a couple days. It takes us a little longer than we used to publish these things because the videos are so involved. But anyway, this is really interesting. So the spotlight for today is going to be featuring the next major mysteries project that we have out, which is Prometheus the Punished. Now, listen, folks. This is reality. The extraterrestrials, which they're going to be talking about in the mainstream one of these days. Somebody's going to make a major announcement eventually. Who knows what's going to happen? But right now, basically like 85% of everybody knows that the extraterrestrials exist and the government's lying. But nonetheless, these extraterrestrials have been around for a very long time. And we have been very interested in going back in time and finding out what they were doing way back when. And Aziz, my son, he's a real person that likes to dig into these. I consider him the remote viewing version of Graham Hancock, going back in time. And he's got a bachelor's in anthropology with an archaeology focus from Emory University and a master's from in international relations, and he's traveled around the world. He loves archaeology. He's been on digs. Anyway, with Prometheus, it's a two-part series. We've already come out with the first part, Prometheus, the fire, when Prometheus gave fire to humans. So what happens is things actually happen in the old days. And the ancient people back in those days had to interpret it in some way, and they came up with the story. So our job at Farsight is to find out what really happened that inspired that story. So it's not that these stories are made out of whole cloth. Something really did happen, and we want to find out what happened. So the Prometheus myth has two basic ideas. Or I should say the Prometheus legend has two basic ideas. The first is that he did something to humanity that the Zeus guy didn't like. And Zeus was no god. He was just like you and me. He just happened to he was a commander. He had a spaceship. He went around raping underage women. He was the E.T. version of Jeffrey Epstein. Anyway, that was Zeus. But Prometheus was doing something to support humanity in some way, to give some type of technological advantage to the way humanity was being kept in this prison and in awful conditions. That was Prometheus the Fire, that first part, and that's already been released on FarsightPrime.com. But the second part is about to be released, and that's Prometheus the Punished. And the story has it that he was chained to a mountain. Zeus sent a bird down to rip out his liver and stuff like that over and over and over again. So, but the real story is what actually did happen back then. We already covered what happened with Prometheus with regard to what he did that ticked off Zeus. But then again, what happened to this punishment? What kind of punishment did he actually get, and what was all that about? So that's what this new project is about. It's the completion of the Prometheus legend, which actually started from something real. And so that's what we're showing you, what happened for real. Anyway, Aziz has really been pioneering this. He really likes advanced video kind of stuff. So really what I want to show you right now is the trailer for that. So actually, let me first show you the thumbnail for Prometheus the Punished. And so now what I want to do is to show you the actual video for that. Okay, so let's actually start that.
Farsight presents Prometheus the Punished.
Hello everyone. Welcome to another Farsight Major Mysteries project, Prometheus the Punished. This is the part 2 of our Prometheus investigation. Part 1, Prometheus the Fire, was released just a couple of months ago on FarsightPrime.com. If you haven't watched Prometheus the Fire yet, please pause this video and go look up Prometheus the Fire on FarsightPrime.com before watching this presentation. Now, without further ado, Prometheus the Punished. In this project, Farsight sent out 2 remote viewers to collect the data, Intisum and Yeme. The story of Prometheus is one of the most enduring tales of human history. According to the ancient Greek tragedian Aeschylus, Prometheus, a titan of immense intellect, stole fire from the gods of Mount Olympus and gave it to a struggling humanity. This act of rebellion sparked a dawn of human civilization, arts, sciences, and most importantly, it increases our quality of life. But Zeus, the king of the gods, did not let this defiance go unpunished. He condemned Prometheus to a horrific fate, chained to a rock in the Caucasus Mountains, where every day the hound of Zeus, an eagle or a hawk, would descend from the sky to tear out his liver. His liver would regenerate overnight, only for the brutal cycle to repeat the next day. Now, livers actually do regenerate when a part is cut out to an extent. I was born with a liver, and I assume you were all born with one too. Maybe that part of the myth just is hinting to the medical unique properties of a human liver. Well, in part 1, Shantae and Kamaya really did uncover that Prometheus was a tall alien being, and he really did coordinate some stealth operation that resulted in a lot of destruction and the transfer of a high technological device that had intense energetics to primitive humans.
Well, if you ask me, the major military Earth empires all use a bird of prey, like a hawk or an eagle.
To symbolize that they are the current enforcers of Zeus's will.
Zeus not just being the ancient Greek deity, but also an Anunnaki or Elohim civilization that likely controls Earth to this day.
Judging by the remote viewing data across all of our projects so far, I'd guess that they are the popularly named Tall Whites.
We can't assume that they are them.
Exactly. Those labels don't come from our remote viewing data. They're just popular UFO jargon.
The humans at the time seemed far less sophisticated than the alien so-called gods, but after receiving the fire, they evolved and unified into a much more advanced civilization. But there are also plenty of questions. What is this punishment? The Hound of Zeus, taking the form of a bird of prey? What is that really? Why a bird of prey? And why call it a hound? A hound is typically a loyal dog that is the subservient partner of a man who plays out the role of a hunter. It is no coincidence that throughout history, many of the strongest nations, especially those tied to the Western world, trace their cultural lineage back to the Greco-Roman roots and have adopted birds of prey as their symbols of ultimate power and dominance. For example, the American eagle. The Nazis also had a strong bird of prey in their symbology too. The Romans had an eagle in their symbology. Is there a deeper connection? A hidden cultural memory tied directly to our extraterrestrial past, mirroring the aerial enforcers of these ancient gods. Who are these beings truly? Who were the entities that laid down the law and punished Prometheus for accelerating human development? How much control of our current world do they still have? Well, we still need to find out what this hound of Zeus really is, and what did Prometheus's punishment really entail? Let's start digging into all of this and more right now on FarsightPrime.com. First up, into some.
Okay, everybody. So that's sort of the introduction for the Prometheus the Punished video. It's a unbelievably interesting video, and you really have to know this. This is not something that's fiction like Indiana Jones movies that George Lucas did. They were great, but they were fiction. These things that we're doing here are similar in sort of the type of content, but they're not fiction. They're real. And so this is something that everyone really, really needs to know. And so that's what we're focusing on right now. Okay? All right. Now, I also want to mention that will be released in a few days on FarsightPrime.com. Okay? Now, also, this particular spotlight is, as we do now, starting last week with all spotlights, we're breaking it up into two parts. The first part is a normal spotlight that we've always had, same length, same everything, but it's going to end, and then we're going to continue this with the Farsight Secrets on the same spotlight, but it's called the Farsight Secrets. And the Farsight Secrets is the extended version of this spotlight, and that only goes up on FarsightPrime.com. We're telling you stuff in the Farsight Secrets that we simply cannot publish on YouTube. So it's not that we're trying to put things behind a paywall. It's that what we tell you in the Farsight Secrets is stuff that we've been holding back on for a long time. And every week we've decided just to tell you what's going on. So we're having two parts, the normal spotlight followed by the Farsight Secrets. So if you watch this on FarsightPrime.com, you'll get everything. The Farsight Spotlight plus the Farsight Secrets. That Farsight Secret stuff is really important. It's what sort of drives us every day when we're doing our work here at Farsight. So much happens that we have not been able to tell you about. And the secrecy of what's been happening is ending. Okay, so that's it. So the major topic for today is about how people are controlling you. What is it that the people that control power don't want you to see? So let's begin with that, because this is a really interesting thing. And once you realize the depth of it and how it actually works, you'll be able to see through it. And we're one step closer to being free on this planet. So, welcome in. And I want to thank you for tuning in to today's Spotlight live stream. So, when most of us think about censorship, our minds instantly go to the classic dystopian image of a black marketer redacting state secrets, books being burned, or outright government bans on the evening news. That doesn't happen anymore, folks. Direct force, well, actually it does happen like in North Korea and stuff like that, but in the rest of the world, it doesn't happen anymore. Direct force is only the bluntest and often the least effective way to control what a society thinks. Over the last century, some of the most insightful political theorists and media scholars realized that the most powerful censorship isn't about what you're forbidden from seeing. It's about shaping the boundaries of what you think is possible to discuss. So this goes back a while, but it also comes up to the most recent time. So like in the 1920s, Walter Lippmann, he argued that the public is essentially navigating a pseudo-environment, simplified pictures fed to us because the real world is just too complex. Now, I do voting analysis, and this is something we've long known in voting analysis. I'll give you some examples. Michael Dukakis ran against George H.W. Bush back in the day. And he had 29 issues that he thought he wanted the public to know about. Now, he had really good campaign advisors, like the manager Garth was his campaign, worked on his campaign, and they were the best. They knew what could be done and what couldn't be done. But Michael Dukakis had his own ideas about things and disregarded the advice of his advisors and kept talking about the 29 issues. Well, nobody wanted to hear about 29 issues. Now, George H.W. Bush, the senior George Bush, he was vice president under Ronald Reagan, and he learned a lot about how to win elections. And Ronald Reagan's election team actually had people from Hollywood running it. So, like the guy who invented when you see babies and animals talking on TV, well, that was the first one that happened. That was the Meow Mix singing cat commercial, and the guy who invented that was the guy who was doing a lot of Ronald Reagan's campaigns. So, boiling everything down. Now, George H.W. Bush took the advice of his advisors because he inherited those advisors from Ronald Reagan. And George W. Bush said, his advisor said, no, we're going to have 4 issues. 4 issues and only 4 issues. Let me see if I can remember them. Read my lips, no new taxes, and then a constitutional amendment against burning the flag, constitutional amendment for prayer in schools, and a constitutional amendment banning abortion. Those 4 issues. Now, after he got into office, there was not a peep about any of those things except the taxes. And he actually ended up raising taxes, which caused him a lot of trouble. And that was one of the major reasons why he lost the next election. However, the basic idea is that the voters don't want to have too many complex things put in front of them. They want something simple. And if you force them through things that are complicated, they're going to get angry with you. They want simple stuff. So the scholars that did this, that understood this type of thing, realized that people don't want things that are complicated. They want simplified pictures fed to them because the real world is just too complex. So that was, again, something that in the 1920s Walter Lippmann argued about. So this goes back quite a way. Now, decades later, Noam Chomsky and Edward Herman showed that in modern democracies, you don't even need a ministry of propaganda. Market incentives, corporate media ownership, and institutional filters quietly manufacture consent before the story ever airs. Now, Antonio Gramsci, he called it cultural hegemony, making the ruling class worldview seem like natural common sense. Now, Michel Foucault, and the way it's spelled in English, it's like Michael Foucault, but it's Michel Foucault in French, showed how institutions use the definition of sanity and truth to delegitimize dissent. And in our digital era, scholars like Margaret Roberts have shown that censorship has evolved today. And today, authorities don't just delete inconvenient facts, they introduce subtle digital fiction, or friction rather. They introduce subtle digital friction, or they flood your feed with endless distraction until critical information is drowned out. So, today on the stream, the live stream, we're peeling back the curtain on these exact mechanisms. How this information is filtered, diverted, and curated around us, and how do we spot it in real time so we can be free? So drop your thoughts in the chat, hit that subscribe button, and let's dive in. So let's talk about the scholars across sociology, political science, and media theory, and how they've analyzed how political and economic elites regulate what the public sees, believes, and discusses. So let's first start with two really great scholars, Edward S. Herman and Noam Chomsky. Now, their core concept is that the propaganda model and structural media filters things. So, information restriction in democratic societies rarely relies on direct state violence. Not these days. Instead, structural market incentives filter news before it even reaches the public. So, these two scholars identified 5 structural filters, and here they are. There's corporate ownership concentration, and wow, is that happening. Advertising revenue dependence. Like YouTube won't even let you monetize stuff if it doesn't fit into neat categories. And reliance on official establishment sources, and organized negative backlash, or the flack. And finally, external ideological threats. Originally that was anti-communism, and later it became anti-terrorism. So the key publications are this: Manufacturing Consent, The Political Economy of the Mass Media. And again, that was the Edward Herman and Noam Chomsky. Okay, so here's a historical example. Coverage of the U.S. foreign policy in Central America during the 1980s, where corporate media systematically framed violence by U.S.-backed regimes, for example in El Salvador, as defensive, while framing while framing identical actions by ideological adversaries, such as in Nicaragua, as atrocities. We've seen that happen a lot. Now, let's go to the next scholar, Walter Lippmann. And Walter Lippmann's key core concept is the manufacture of consent and the pseudo-environment. Lippmann is really interesting. You see, the modern world is too vast for complex ordinary citizens to grasp directly, forcing the public to rely on simplified pictures in our heads, pseudo-environments constructed by media. Well, he argued that the masses are a bewildered herd, that's his words, prone to irrationality, asserting that specialized elite class must curate and steer information to maintain social stability. You may think this is crazy for people to be talking about the advantages of controlling the masses, but that's what they did. Now, his key publication was called Public Opinion, and that was actually published in 1922. Now, here's a historical example. The Creel Committee. Now, that was the Committee on Public Information during World War I, where the United States government orchestrated nationwide propaganda to transform a pacifist, non-interventionist public into a pro-war society within months. And it worked. It worked. Okay, now let's go into the third scholar we'll look at today. Antonio Gramsci. Now, his core concept is cultural hegemony, cultural hegemony. Okay? So, dominant classes maintain power, not merely through coercive state apparatuses like police and the military, but through cultural and informational institutions, schools, religious bodies, media. And for those of you who love political music, Bob Marley used to sing about this all the time. He called it the Babylon system. And, it's the masses are controlled not by the police and the military. They're controlled by cultural and informational institutions, schools, religious bodies, media. He used to call them thieves and murderers, and I'm a professor at a major university, so he was talking about me and, other people who teach, because we come out of a society in which that type of thing happens. So it's not coercive in the sense that putting a gun against your head and saying, do what I say or you're going to die. It's subtle. It's controlled by the institutions themselves, the schools, the religious bodies, the media. So by defining common sense and acceptable norms, the ruling elites inhibit counter-narratives before they take root. And that is achieving spontaneous consent from the government without overt censorship. I mean, this is really amazing, but that's what Antonio Gramsci actually wrote about and talked about, okay? And it's really relevant today. Now, his big publication was called Prison Notebooks. And that was actually written between 1929 and 1935, his prison notebooks, okay? Let's go to a historical example. Mussolini's fascist Italy, where the regime went beyond banning opposition press by reshaping the entire national educational curricula, civic holidays, and leisure organizations. Now, they did this to normalize fascist values as the default cultural reality. Folks, you should be realizing that this is today. This is what we're going through. Okay, now let's go to the French scholar Michel Foucault. And if you look at the spelling of it, it looks like Foucault, but it's Michel Foucault. And his core concept was that power, knowledge, regimes, and institutional discipline are the key things. Power, knowledge, regimes, and institutional disciplines. So, for Michel Foucault, power is not purely top-down or centralized. It's embedded within language, institutions, and accepted categories of truth. Societies control information by establishing epistemic boundaries, categorizing dissent or unorthodox knowledge as deviant, unscientific, or madness. Folks, if you're not thinking about the current state of disclosure with regard to this, you should be, because this fits into it perfect. So his key publication is Discipline and Punish. And that was a 1975 publication, and also Power, Knowledge. That was a 1980 publication. Okay, so that was Michel Foucault. Now, let me give you a historical example. Soviet political psychiatry during the 1960s and 1980s, where political dissidents such as Vladimir Bukovsky, who distributed anti-Soviet writing, were officially diagnosed with sluggish schizophrenia and confined to psychiatric hospitals, neutralizing their message by labeling it clinical insanity rather than political dissent. Yeah. Okay, now the last of the scholars that we're going to talk about today. Margaret E. Roberts, Gary King, and Jennifer Pan. Now, Gary King, he's a political scientist at Harvard, and actually he was a colleague of mine when we both taught at the same time at UCLA back in the day. So, Margaret E. Roberts, Gary King, and Jennifer Pan. Now, their core concept is digital censorship via friction, flooding, and collective action silencing. Okay, so here's the basics. Modern authoritarian digital censorship does not prioritize suppressing general criticism of the state. It prioritizes silencing information capable of sparking collective action and offline mobilization. So control operates through these three distinct levers. The first is fear, and that's the threat of punishment. And then there's friction, which is making information slightly inconvenient to access via firewalls and throttling. And the third is the flooding, distracting the public with massive volumes of cheerleading or irrelevant content. Now, their key publication is an article, How Censorship in China Allows Government Criticism but Silences Collective Expression. And that came out in the American Political Science Review in 2013. So, censored. Oh, there was another one actually just by Robert herself, which is Censored Distraction and Diversion Inside China's Great Firewall. And she published that in 2018. So let's go through an example. The deployment of the 50-cent party, that was the name of a political party in China, where millions of state-coordinated social media posts were systematically injected during crises such as local protests or industrial disasters to dilute organic discourse with distractors and patriotic stories rather than directly debating the critics. Okay, so let me try to address the complaints that people might say with regard to this argument. For example, someone may say, doesn't the internet and independent media make Chomsky's propaganda model obsolete? Like, anyone can start a podcast, a Substack, or a TikTok channel, so mainstream media no longer holds a monopoly on news delivery. Okay, so let's say you say that. Okay, here's my response. Decentralized creation doesn't mean decentralized distribution. While anybody can publish, reach is still governed by concentrated choke points, mega platform algorithms, monetization structures, and ad dollars. So independent creators face the exact same structural filter, which is cater to algorithmic engagement and advertiser brand safety or get buried. Now, the gatekeepers changed, but the economic incentives, they didn't change. So it doesn't matter that so many people can just publish anywhere. If zillions of people aren't watching them, what does it matter? Okay, let's go to the sort of second major idea I'm thinking about for how people might object. So let's say you say something like, isn't calling this information control just another word for conspiracy theories? Now, the word conspiracy theories came out with when the JFK assassination happened, and the government was the ones who started that. And it was quite obvious that if you looked at the Zapruder film, it was quite obvious that Kennedy was shot from multiple directions. It was an assassination. And we have a project on the Kennedy assassination that details everything that actually happened. Who the hit squads were, Lee Harvey Oswald did not kill John F. Kennedy as far as our remote viewing data are concerned. Our remote viewing data very closely match the actual facts that actually existed. For example, in the Warren Report, the government's own experts, I think it was FBI, but the government's own experts examining the rifle that Lee Harvey Oswald is said to have used to shoot John F. Kennedy was broken. it was rusted. And the government's own experts could not fix the targeting. You know, our rifles have to be aimed. There has to be a sight on them and everything. They tried to fix the aiming thing on the rifle by putting shims in it, and they couldn't do it. You couldn't aim that rifle. Now, whoever shot John F. Kennedy was clearly a marksman. And marksmen, you know what they do. They're gun people. They don't let their rifles get rusty and have broken sights, so you can't even aim it. So, you know, whoever shot John F. Kennedy did not use that rifle. Now, it is part of the Warren Report that the rifle was broken and rusted, and that the government's own experts could not fix the rifle by putting shims in it and try to fix the targeting thing. That's in the official Warren Report. So, to sort of counteract people from just saying, okay, well, who really shot him? Has to be a conspiracy of some type. Somebody had to do it. They called it conspiracy theory and made it something that you would be laughed at. It's just a conspiracy theory. Everything that happens is a conspiracy. You always needed two people to agree to do something, and it's conspiracy. So, but they tried to make it, you know, something like the swear word. So anyway, some people could push back with what I've been saying today and say, well, isn't calling this information control just another word for conspiracy theories? So it's suggesting that the media outlets and the elites, they coordinate their messages, and that sounds a lot like a room full of villains pulling strings. Okay, so here's my response to that. It's not a conspiracy. It's an incentive structure. You don't need editors secretly coordinating in a smoky back room when everyone shares the same commercial model, the same elite social circles, and the same reliance on official government press releases. So as Chomsky famously told an interviewer, I'm not saying you're self-censoring. I'm saying if you believe something different, you wouldn't be sitting where you're sitting. He had great quotes. Okay, so let me come up with sort of another sort of pushback that somebody may say with regard to what I'm talking about today. So you might say, like, isn't content moderation necessary to stop dangerous misinformation and hate speech? Okay, so unchecked information can cause real-world harm, fuel riots, or spread medical falsehoods. So control isn't easy, you may say. It's safety. Okay, so here's my response to that. Moderating genuine harm is a legitimate challenge. But the core issue is who decides what is true. When governments or corporate platforms hold the power to define harmful or misinformation, that power inevitably gets used to protect institutional interests and suppress inconvenient dissent. The risk isn't moderation itself, it's unaccountable authority setting the boundaries of acceptable debate. That's the problem. Okay, this is a great one. This is a great pushback that some people might say to my arguments that I have today. If people choose what they consume, isn't media bias simply audience demand? You're calling things media bias. It's just what people want to watch. Well, outlets do publish rage bait and partisan coverage because consumers click on it. And the audience controls the media, not the other way around. That's what the argument goes. Okay, so here's my response to that. Audience demand is real. But supply dictates choice. Audience demand is real, but supply dictates choice. Now, Walter Lippmann, who we talked about just a minute ago, he pointed out that the public can only react to the pseudo-environment that they're presented with. When the only viable business models reward algorithmic polarization and shallow sensationalism, the audience tastes are shaped by the menu that they're handed every morning. Yeah. Okay, so here, I'm going to go a little bit further here. What about if somebody says, well, wait, Courtney. How can ordinary people protect themselves from subtle information control? If control is structural and invisible, is individual critical thinking pointless? So why even try? Okay, here's my response to that. There are 3 practical habits that make a huge difference. First is what I call lateral reading. So when a story breaks, you don't read down the page. Open 3 new tabs to see who is funding the sources and how outside outlets frame the exact same facts. I want you to track incentives. Always ask, how does this outlet make money? And who benefits if I believe this headline? So step outside the feed. Seek out primary documents, peer-reviewed data, and long-form investigative reporting rather than relying on curated algorithm feeds. So, if there's one takeaway from today's talk, this is it. Information control rarely looks like a locked door. Most of the time, it looks like an endless feed. It's the stories that never get funded, the outrage engineered to keep us distracted, and the subtle boundary lines drawn around what society considers normal to question. Those are boundary lines. And the goal of modern control isn't just to stop you from speaking. It's to keep you so saturated with noise that you never stop to ask who built the architecture around your attention. Do you understand what I just said? The goal of modern control is not just to stop you from speaking. It's to keep you so saturated with noise that you never stop to ask, who built the architecture around all it is that you're looking at? The stuff that you're looking at isn't just random stuff that you're seeing. It's architecturally pure. Who built it? That's what you need to ask. So don't just consume the menu that you're handed. Follow the incentives. Read laterally. And question the consensus, especially when that same consensus feels comfortable. So if there's a consensus and it feels comfortable, that's what you want to question. That is what you want to question. Anyway, let's see what the time is now. Okay, so I want to thank you for joining the stream today. I want you to ask and keep asking uncomfortable questions, and I'll be seeing you next time, but I'm not stopping. The next thing is Farsight Secrets. And the Farsight Secrets, trust me folks, I simply cannot tell you this stuff on YouTube. I just can't. If you don't know why, you're living in another universe. But on FarsightPrime.com, I will continue this spotlight, the same exact spotlight, but you'll see the next part, the Farsight Secrets. And that's going to happen every week because we have so many secrets that are being done, we want you to see them. So, Farsight Secrets, that's coming up. For those of you who are watching this or going to watch this on FarsightPrime.com. I want to thank everybody for visiting here. Remember that Prometheus the Punished a great major mysteries is coming out again on FarsightPrime.com, and you've seen this sort of little intro for it. Cinematically, it's really amazing. It's really great. So, and it's going deep. Like, it's going deep into anthropology, archaeology. It's going deep into all this stuff to show what really happened, where we're taking the remote viewing data and explaining what happened in these ancient stories that came out of the past. These so-called myths, which are really legends, which really had real-life things happen to create them. And if you're to understand the stuff that's happening today, you need to put it all together with the stuff that happened anciently, in the ancient days. You have to see the connection. What happened then is the type of stuff, major type of control that's happening now. Different strategies, different techniques, different things, but it's the same issue. Control by very, very, very adversarial, negative type of people. E.T. type people. Anyway, all right. I'll see you all next week on next week's Spotlight. And for those of you who are going to join me on FarsightPrime.com, right here, you'll see the Farsight secrets as I continue. See you then.